were a lot of people on the street. "Are you in a hurry?" Victor asked Maria Ivanovna. "We could go to the park again." "But people are already coming home from work. I must get back before Pyotr Lavrentievitch." Victor was expecting her to ask him round. Then Sokolov could tell him about the meeting. But she didn't say anything. He began to wonder if Sokolov was afraid to meet him. He felt hurt that Maria Ivanovna was in such a hurry, but of course it was only natural. They passed a little square not far from the road leading to the Donskoy monastery. Suddenly Maria Ivanovna stopped and said, "Let's sit down for a minute. Then I can get the trolleybus." They sat there in silence. Victor could sense that she was very troubled. Her head slightly bent, she looked straight into his eyes. They remained silent. Her lips were tightly closed, but he seemed able to hear her voice. Everything was quite clear, as though it had already been said. What difference could words make? Victor knew that something very serious was happening, that a new imprint lay on his life, that he was entering a time of deep and painful confusion. He didn't want to make anyone suffer. It would be better if no one knew of their love. Perhaps they shouldn't talk of it even to one another. Or perhaps... But they couldn't conceal what was happening now. They couldn't hide their present joy and sorrow, and this alone would have deep and inevitable consequences. What was happening depended only on them, but it seemed like a fate they were powerless to oppose. What lay between them was true and natural. They were no more responsible for it than a man is responsible for the light of day. And yet this truth inevitably engendered insincerity, deceit, and cruelty towards those dearest to them. It was in their power to avoid deceit and cruelty. All they had to do was renounce this clear and natural light. One thing was plain. He had lost his peace of mind forever. Whatever happened, he would never know peace, whether he hid his love for the woman beside him, or whether it became his destiny, he would not know peace. Whether he was with her, feeling guilty, or whether he was apart from her, aching for her, he would have no peace. She was still staring at him. Victor found her look of mingled happiness and despair almost unbearable. He hadn't given in. He had stood firm against a vast and merciless force, but how weak, how helpless he felt now. "Victor Pavlovitch," she said, "it's time for me to go. Pyotr Lavrentievitch will be waiting." She took him by the hand. "We won't be able to see each other any more. I gave Pyotr Lavrentievitch my word not to see you." Victor felt like someone dying of a heart attack. His heart, whose beating had never depended on his will, was stopping. The universe was swaying, turning upside down. The air and the earth were disappearing. "But why, Maria Ivanovna?" "Pyotr Lavrentievitch made me promise to stop seeing you. I gave him my word. I know that's terrible, but he's in such a state. He's quite ill. I'm afraid he might die." "Masha," said Victor. There was an invincible power in her voice and her face, the same power that he had been struggling against everywhere. "Masha," he repeated. "Dear God, you can see everything. You understand all too well. I'm not hiding anything. But why talk about it all? I can't. I just can't. Pyotr Lavrentievitch has been through so much. You know that yourself. And think of Lyudmila's sufferings. It's impossible." "Yes. Yes, we have no right," said Victor. "My dearest, my unhappy friend, my light," said Maria Ivanovna. Victor's hat fell to the ground. People were probably looking at them. "Yes, yes, we have no right," he repeated. He kissed her hands. As he held her small cold fingers, he felt that the unshakable strength of her resolve went hand in hand with weakness, submissiveness, helplessness. She got up from the bench and walked away without looking back. He sat there thinking that for the first time in his life he had seen happiness, light, and now it had left him. This woman whose fingers he had just kissed could have replaced everything he had ever wanted, everything he had dreamed of. Science, fame, the joy of recognition. The following day, Sevastyanov phoned Victor and asked his and Lyudmila's health. When Victor asked about the meeting, Sevastyanov answered, "I don't want to upset you, Victor Pavlovich, but there are more non-entities around than even I ever imagined." Surely Sokolov can't have spoken, thought Victor. Was a resolution passed? He asked. Yes, a harsh one, that certain things were considered incompatible, that the directors should be asked to reassess. I see, said Victor. He had known very well that such a resolution would be adopted, but now it seemed somehow unexpected. He felt quite taken aback. I'm innocent, he thought, but still I'm sure to be arrested. They knew very well that Krimov was innocent, and he was arrested. Did anyone vote against? He asked. In reply, he heard an embarrassed silence. No, Victor Pavlovich, I think it was unanimous. You did yourself a lot of harm by not attending. Sevastyanov's voice was barely audible. He must have rung from a call box. The same day, Anna Stepanovna telephoned. She had already been dismissed and no longer went into the institute. She didn't know about the meeting. She said she was going to stay with her sister in Murom for 2 months and invited him to join them. Victor felt touched. Oh, thank you, he said. But if I go to Murom, it won't be for a rest. It will be to teach physics in a technical college. Heavens, Victor Pavlovich, said Anna Stepanovna, what made you do all that just for me? You make me despair. I'm not worth it. She had obviously taken what he had said about the technical college as a reproach. Her voice was also very faint. She too must be ringing from a call box. Did Sokolov really speak? Victor asked himself. Late that night, Chepizin rang. All day Victor had been like an invalid who came to life only when people spoke about his disease. Chepizin obviously sensed this. Did Sokolov speak? Can he really have done so? Victor asked Lyudmila. But she, of course, knew no more than he did. A veil seemed to have fallen between him and everyone close to him. Sevastyanov had been afraid to talk about what most concerned Victor. He hadn't wanted to be the one who told him. He was probably worried that Victor would meet people from the institute and say, I know everything already. Sevastyanov's given me a detailed report. Anna Stepanovna had been very affectionate, but she should have done more than just phone him. At a time like this, she should have called at his home. And as for Chepizin, he should have offered Victor a job at the Astrophysics Institute, or at least mentioned it as a possibility. They all upset me, and I upset them, thought Victor. It'd be better if they didn't phone at all. He felt still more offended, however, with the people who hadn't phoned. He waited all day long for calls from Gurevich, Markov and Pimenov. He even felt a sudden burst of anger at the electricians and technicians who were setting up the new apparatus. The swine, he said to himself. They've got nothing to fear. The workers are all right. As for Sokolov, Victor couldn't bear even to think about him. He had told Maria Ivanovna never to phone. Victor could pardon everyone else, colleagues, old acquaintances, relatives, but his friend. He felt so angry when he thought about Sokolov, so deeply and painfully upset, that he could hardly breathe. Without realizing it, however, he was pleased to find in Sokolov's betrayal a justification for his own betrayal of Sokolov. Victor was so nervous that he wrote a quite unnecessary letter to Shishakov asking to be informed of the decision taken by the directors of the institute. He himself was ill and would be unable to come to work for several days. The phone didn't ring once during the whole of the following day. What does it matter? I'm going to be arrested anyway. By now this thought was more of a consolation than a torment. Invalids console themselves in the same way, saying, illness or no illness, we all die in the end. The only person we hear any news from is Zenya, Victor said to Lyudmila, but then that's from the NKVD, straight from the horse's mouth. I'm sure of it now, said Lyudmila. Sokolov must have spoken at the Scientific Council. That's the only way I can explain Maria Ivanovna's silence. She feels ashamed. In that case, I'll phone her myself while he's out at work. No! Shouted Victor. You mustn't do that. You absolutely mustn't. Your relations with Sokolov have nothing to do with me, said Lyudmila. I'm friends with Masha. Victor couldn't explain why she must not phone Maria Ivanovna, but he felt ashamed at the idea of Lyudmila unwittingly becoming a link between them. Lyuda, from now on, our contact with people has to be one-sided. If a man's been arrested, his wife can only visit people who've invited her. She doesn't have the right to say, I want to come round. That would be humiliating for both her and her husband. You and I have entered a new epoch. We can no longer write to anyone ourselves. We can only reply to letters. We can no longer phone anyone. We can only pick up the receiver when it rings. We don't even have the right to greet acquaintances. They may prefer not to notice us. And if someone does greet me, I don't have the right to speak first. He might consider it possible to give me a nod of the head, but not to talk to me. I can only answer if he speaks first. You and I are pariahs. He paused for a moment. Fortunately for the pariahs, however, there are exceptions. There are one or two people, and I'm not talking about family, about Xenia or your mother, whom a pariah can trust. He can contact these people without first waiting for a sign, people like Chepezin. Yes, Vitya, answered Lyudmila. You're absolutely right. Victor was amazed. It was a long time since Lyudmila had agreed with anything he said. And I have a friend like that myself. Maria Ivanovna, she went on. Lyuda, said Victor, do you realize that Maria Ivanovna's given her word to Sokolov not to go on seeing us? Now, phone her. Go on, phone her after that. He snatched up the receiver and held it out to Lyudmila. As he did so, a small part of him was hoping, perhaps she will phone. Then at least one of us will hear Maria Ivanovna's voice. So, it's like that, is it? Said Lyudmila, putting down the receiver. What can have happened to Zheneyevna? Our troubles have brought us together. I've never felt such tenderness towards her as I do now. When his daughter came in, Victor said, Nadia, I've had a talk with Mama. She'll tell you about it in detail herself. Now, I'm a pariah. You must stop going to the Postoyevs. Derensky felt a strange mixture of feelings as he looked at the German tanks and lorries that had been abandoned in the snow, at the frozen corpses, at the column of men being marched under escort to the east. This was retribution indeed. He remembered stories about how the Germans had made fun of the poverty of the peasant huts, how they had gazed in surprise and disgust at the simple cradles, the crude stoves, the earthenware pots, the pictures on the walls, the wooden tubs, the painted clay cocks, at the beloved and wonderful world in which the boys then fleeing from their tanks had been born and brought up. Look, Comrade Colonel, said his driver. 4 Germans were carrying one of their comrades on a greatcoat. You could tell from their faces, from their straining necks, that soon they'd fall to the ground. They swayed from side to side. They tripped over the tangled rags wound round their feet. The dry snow lashed their mindless eyes. Their frozen fingers gripped the corners of the greatcoat like hooks. So much for the Fritzes, said the driver. We never asked them to come here, said Derensky. Suddenly he felt a wave of happiness. Straight through the steppe, in a cloud of mist and snow, Soviet tanks were making their way to the west. They looked quick and fierce, strong and muscular. Soldiers were standing up in the hatches. He could see their faces and shoulders, their black helmets and their black sheepskins. There they were, tearing through the ocean-like steppe, leaving behind them a foaming wake of dirty snow. Derensky caught his breath in pride and happiness. Terrible and sombre, a steel-clad Russia had turned her face to the west. There was a hold-up as they came to a village. Derensky got out of his jeep and walked past 2 rows of trucks and some tarpaulin-covered katyushas. A group of prisoners was being herded along the road. A full colonel who had just got out of his car was watching. He was wearing a cap made from silver astrakhan fur, the kind you can only obtain if you're in command of an army, or if you have a quartermaster as a close friend. The guards waved their machine guns at the prisoners and shouted, come on, look lively there!" An invisible wall separated these prisoners from the soldiers and lorry drivers. A cold still more extreme than the cold of the steppes prevented their eyes from meeting. "Look at that," said a laughing voice. "One of them's got a tail." A German soldier was crawling across the road on all fours. A scrap of torn quilt trailed along behind him. The soldier was crawling as quickly as he could, moving his arms and legs like a dog, his head to the ground as though he were following a scent. He was making straight for the colonel. The driver standing beside the colonel said, "Watch out, comrade colonel, he's going to bite you." The colonel stepped to one side. As the German came up to him, he gave him a push with his boot. The feeble blow was enough to break him. He collapsed on the ground, his arms and legs splayed out on either side. The German looked up at the man who had just kicked him. His eyes were like those of a dying sheep. There was no reproach or suffering in them, nothing at all except humility. "Fine warrior that shit makes," said the colonel, wiping the sole of his boot on the snow. There was a ripple of laughter among the onlookers. Everything went dark. Derensky was no longer his own master. Another man, someone who was at once very familiar to him and yet utterly alien, someone who never hesitated, was directing his actions. "Comrade Colonel," he said, "Russians don't kick a man when he's down." "What do you think I am, then?" asked the colonel. "Do you think I'm not a Russian?" "You're a scoundrel," said Derensky. He saw the colonel take a step towards him. Forestalling the man's angry threats, he shouted, "My surname's Derensky, Lieutenant Colonel Derensky, Inspector of the Operations Section of Stalingrad Front Headquarters. I'm ready to repeat what I said to you before the commander of the front and before a military tribunal." In a voice full of hatred, the colonel said, "Very well, Lieutenant Colonel Derensky. You will be hearing from me." He stalked away. Some prisoners came up and dragged their comrade to one side. After that, wherever Derensky turned, he kept meeting the eyes of the prisoners. It was as though something attracted them to him. As he walked slowly back to his jeep, he heard a mocking voice say, "So, the Fritzes have found a defender." Soon Derensky was on his way again, but they were held up by another column of prisoners being marched towards them, the Germans in grey uniforms, the Romanians in green. Derensky's fingers were trembling as he lit a cigarette. The driver noticed this out of the corner of his eye and said, "I don't feel any pity for them. I could shoot any one of them just like that." "Fine," said Derensky, "but you should have shot them in 1941 instead of taking to your heels like I did." He said nothing more for the rest of the journey. This incident, however, didn't open his heart. On the contrary, it was as though he was quite exhausted his store of kindness. What an abyss lay between the road he was following today and the road he had taken to Yashkul through the Kalmyk steppe. Was he really the same man who, beneath an enormous moon, had stood on what seemed to be the last corner of Russian earth, who had watched the fleeing soldiers and the snake-like necks of the camels, tenderly making room in his heart for the poor, for the weak, for everyone whom he loved? The command post of the tank corps lay on the outskirts of the village. Derensky drove up to the hut. It was already dark, but they had obviously only recently moved in. Soldiers were unloading suitcases and mattresses from a truck, and signallers were installing telephones. The soldier on sentry duty reluctantly went inside and called for the duty officer. He came reluctantly out onto the porch. Like all duty officers, he looked at the new arrival's epaulettes rather than at his face. "Comrade Lieutenant Colonel, the corps commander's only just got back from visiting one of the brigades. He's having a rest. He can see you later." "Report to the corps commander that Lieutenant Colonel Derensky has arrived. Is that clear?" The officer sighed and went back into the hut. A minute later he came out again and called, "This way, please, Comrade Lieutenant Colonel." Derensky climbed the steps up onto the porch and saw Novikov coming to meet him. For a few moments they just looked at one another, laughing. "So we meet again," said Novikov. It was a good meeting. Two intelligent heads bent over the map, just as they had in the old days. "I'm advancing as fast as I once retreated," said Novikov. "Even faster on this bit of the course." "And this is winter," said Derensky. "Just wait till the summer." "I know." It was wonderful to study the map with Derensky. He grasped things immediately, and he was interested in details that no one except Novikov ever seemed to notice. Lowering his voice, as though he were about to come out with some personal confidence, Novikov said, "Of course, we have scouts in the zone of operations. Of course, we have a coordinated system of reference points for the terrain. Of course, we liaise with other arms of the service. But the operations of every other arm are subordinated to one good. The T-34, she's the queen." Derensky was familiar with the maps of the other military operations then in progress. He told Novikov about the campaign in the Caucasus, the contents of the intercepted conversations between Hitler and Paulus, and about the movement of General Freta Pico's artillery units. "You can already see the Ukraine through the window," said Novikov. He pointed to the map. "I think I'm nearer than anyone else, but Rodin's corps is right on my heels." Then he pushed the map aside and said, "Well, that's enough tactics and strategy for one day." "How's everything else?" asked Derensky. "Still the same?" "No," said Novikov. "Very different indeed. You haven't got married, have you?" "I'm expecting to any day. She should be here soon." "Well, well," said Derensky. "Another good man gone. But I congratulate you with all my heart. As for me, I'm still single." "How's Bykov?" asked Novikov abruptly. "Bykov? He's surfaced with Vatutin, doing the same job. He's a tough bastard, isn't he? A rock." "To hell with him," said Novikov. He shouted in the direction of the other room. "What's up, Vershkov? Have you decided to starve us to death? You can call the commissar. We'll all eat together." There was no need to call Getmanov. He opened the door, looked sadly at Novikov and said, "What's all this, Pyotr Pavlovitch? Rodin seems to have overtaken us. You watch it. He'll beat us to the Ukraine yet." He turned to Derensky. "See what a pass things have come to, Lieutenant Colonel. Now we're more afraid of our neighbours than of the enemy. You're not a neighbour, are you? No, I can see you're an old comrade." "You seem to be obsessed with the Ukrainian question," said Novikov. Getmanov reached out for a tin of food and said in a tone of mock threat, "Very well, Pyotr Pavlovitch, but remember this. I won't marry you and your Yevgenia Nikolaevna till we're on Ukrainian soil. The Lieutenant Colonel's my witness." He held out his glass towards Novikov. "Anyway, let's drink to his Russian heart." "That's a good toast," said Derensky in all sincerity. Remembering Derensky's dislike of commissars, Novikov said, "Yes, Comrade Lieutenant Colonel, it's a long time since we last met." Getmanov glanced at the table. "We've got nothing to offer our guest, only a few tins. The cook barely has time to light the stove before we move our command post. We're on the go day and night. You should have come round before the offensive began. Now we only stop for 1 hour in every 24. We'll soon be overtaking ourselves." "You might at least give us a fork," said Novikov to his orderly. "You told us not to unload all that," he replied. Getmanov began giving his impressions of the newly liberated territory. "The Russians and the Kalmyks are like day and night," he began. "The Kalmyks danced to the Germans' tune. They even got issued with green uniforms. They roamed over the steppes, rounding up our men. Just think of what they've been given by Soviet power. They were just a crowd of ragged, illiterate, syphilitic nomads, but it's no good. You can't change a leopard's spots. Even during the Civil War, the vast majority were on the side of the whites. Just think how much money we spent on all those weeks dedicated to the friendship of nations. We'd have done better to spend it on building another tank factory in Siberia. I met one young woman, a Don Cossack, who told me what she went through during these months. No, there's no doubt about it. The Kalmyks have betrayed the confidence of the Russians. That's what I'm going to say in my report to the military Soviet." He turned to Novikov. Do you remember what I said about Basangov? My intuition as a communist didn't let me down. But don't you be offended, Pyotr Pavlovitch. That's not meant as a reproach. Do you think I'd never make mistakes in my life? But you can't overestimate the importance of nationality. That's what we've been taught by the experience of the war. And you know the name of a Bolshevik's best teacher? Experience. As for what you say about the Kalmyks, said Derensky, I couldn't agree more. I've just been in the Kalmyk camp myself. And their steppe, and their land. I can tell you, I've had enough of driving through all these Shiburners and Kitcheners. What made him say that? He'd spent a long time in the steppes, never once felt the least antipathy towards the Kalmyks. On the contrary, he'd felt a genuine interest in their customs and way of life. It was as if the Commissar was endowed with some magnetic power. Derensky felt a need to agree with everything he said. Novikov looked at him with a mocking smile. He knew Getmanov's power only too well. I know you've suffered injustice in your time, said Getmanov to Derensky unexpectedly, but don't you go nursing a grudge against us Bolsheviks. What we want is the good of the people. Derensky, who had always thought that military commissars did nothing but spread confusion, said, But of course, how could I fail to understand that? Certainly there have been times where we've gone too far, Getmanov continued, but the people will pardon us. They will. We're good fellows, and we mean well. Isn't that so? Novikov gave the two men a friendly look and said, Don't you think we've got a fine commissar? You have indeed, said Derensky. That's right, said Getmanov. They all three began to laugh. As though reading the thoughts of the two officers, Getmanov looked at his watch and said, Well, I'm going to go and lie down. I should be able to get a decent night's sleep for one. We're like gypsies, always on the road. It's 10 days since I've taken off my boots. Where's the Chief of Staff? Is he asleep? Asleep, said Novikov. He's already taking a look at our new quarters. We'll be off again in the morning. Novikov and Derensky were left on their own. You know, said Derensky, there's one thing I've never quite managed to understand. Not long ago, I was in the sands near the Caspian. I felt very depressed. I felt it was the end of everything. And then what? I found we've achieved this. What power! What does anything else matter beside this? As for me, said Novikov, I'm really beginning to understand what we Russians can do. We're a fierce breed. We're real wolves. What power? Repeated Derensky. And the important thing is, under the leadership of the Bolsheviks, we Russians are the vanguard of humanity. Everything else is just an insignificant detail. I'll tell you what, said Novikov. Would you like me to ask again to have you transferred here? You could be the Deputy Chief of Staff. We'd be fighting shoulder to shoulder again. How about it? Thank you, said Derensky. Who'd I be deputy to? General Noidobnov. That's as it should be, a lieutenant colonel as deputy to a general. Noidobnov, the one who was abroad just before the war, in Italy. That's right. He's no Suvorov, but it's possible to work with him. Derensky didn't say anything. Novikov looked at him. Well? Derensky put his hand up to his mouth and pulled up his upper lip. See these crowns, he said. That's Noidobnov's work. He knocked out 2 teeth of mine when he was interrogating me in 1937. They looked at each other, didn't say anything, and looked at each other again. A very competent man, said Derensky. Certainly. Of course, said Novikov with an ironic smile. After all, he's not one of those Kalmyks. He's a Russian. And now let's have a real drink, he bellowed. Let's drink like Russians. Derensky had never drunk so much in his life. Nevertheless, but for the 2 empty bottles on the table, no one would have guessed quite how much the 2 men had accounted for. They were now addressing each other as tea. As he refilled the glasses for the 100th time, Novikov said, Come on, don't hold back now. For once, Derensky didn't hold back. They talked about the first days of the war and the retreat, about Blucher and Tukhachevsky, about Zhukov. Derensky spoke about his interrogation. Novikov told Kerensky how he had delayed for a few minutes at the very beginning of the offensive. He didn't tell him how very mistaken he'd been concerning his brigade commanders. Their talk turned to the Germans. Novikov said how he had thought the summer of 1941 would have hardened him forever. But as soon as he had seen the first columns of prisoners, he'd given orders to improve their rations and to have anyone wounded or frostbitten taken to the rear by truck. "Just now your commissar and I were abusing the Kalmyks," said Kerensky. "And we were quite right, but it's a pity your new Dobnov isn't here. I'd like to have a few words with him." "Yes, I certainly would." "And there were no collaborators among the Russians in Kursk and Orel?" asked Novikov. "What about General Vlasov? He's hardly a Kalmyk. As for my Basangov, he's a fine soldier. And new Dobnov, he's a Chekist. He's not a soldier at all. My commissar told me that. But we Russians are going to conquer. Yes, I'll get to Berlin myself. The Germans will never be able to stop us now." "I know about new Dobnov and Yetsov and all that," said Kerensky. "But there's only one Russia now, Soviet Russia, and even if they knock out every one of my teeth, that won't change my love for Russia. I love Russia till my dying day. But I won't be deputy to a prostitute like that. No, comrade, you must be joking." Novikov poured out some more vodka. "Come on, don't hold back." Then he said, "But who knows what else will happen? One day I'll be in disgrace myself." And changing the subject again, he said, "A horrible thing happened the other day. A driver had his head blown off, but he still had his foot on the accelerator. The tank drove on, forward, forward." "Your commissar and I were abusing the Kalmyk," said Kerensky, "but there's one old Kalmyk I just can't get out of my head. How old's that new Dobnov? How about driving to your new quarters and paying him a visit?" "I've been granted a great happiness," said Novikov, in a thick, drawling voice. "The greatest of all happinesses." He took a photograph out of his pocket and passed it to Kerensky. Kerensky looked at it for a long time. "Yeah, she's a real beauty." "Beauty," said Novikov. "Who cares about beauty? No one could love a woman like I do just for her beauty." Bershkov appeared in the doorway. He looked at Novikov questioningly. "Ah, get the hell out of here," said Novikov very slowly. "Why treat him like that?" said Kerensky. He wants to know if you needed him for anything." "Oh, all right, but I can be a swine too, and I don't need you to tell me how to behave. And why are you calling me T anyway? You're just a lieutenant colonel." "So it's like that, is it?" "Don't you know how to take a joke?" said Novikov, thinking to himself, it was a good thing Xenia hadn't yet seen him drunk. "I don't know how to take stupid jokes," said Kerensky. They went on wrangling for a long time. They only made peace when Novikov suggested driving to their new quarters and giving Dobnov a good whipping. Needless to say, they didn't drive anywhere at all. They just went on drinking.